Hello, welcome to the Believe Show. I'm thrilled you're here. We are here with Scott Ellis today. Let me actually show you his name. We're here with Scott Ellis, and we're talking about what he believes to be true. But before we get into that, I'm going to tell you a few things about Scott. Scott and I know each other from business school. Scott has held a huge number of positions in amazing companies like HP. He's run his own company. And Scott was one of my first guitar teachers. He taught me how to play guitar when we were in business school. So hi, Scott.
Hello, good to see you.
Really good to see you. We're going to start with the three silly questions. So first one, what did you want to be when you were growing up?
I wanted to be a judge, ideally a Supreme Court judge.
That's so cool. That's really cool. That's really, really cool. To something a little more simple, what's one of your favorite foods?
Well, it's a tie between tacos and vanilla shake.
Have you ever had those together?
I don't have them together. I may have them like in the same day for sure, but usually not the same meal.
That's a good choice. That's a good choice of both of those. Those sound fun. And then when high school can be a challenging time, what was something that you discovered about yourself during high school?
I don't know if it's a discovery per se, but I think a lot of it for me was about gaining confidence. I think I played sports and I was involved in student government. And I think over time, like I loved my school and had a lot of pride in it, but I think I really gained confidence that then helped me in college and beyond.
Yeah, that's awesome. Believe. What is it that you believe to be true that others may disagree with you about?
I really believe that mastery learning is the transformational education and innovation of our time. I think there are so many well-intentioned people working on so many things, but I think this is the one innovation we can implement that I think would really change the game.
So for people who have no idea what mastery learning is, could you tell us?
I think ultimately what it's about is enabling students to move forward in their learning at their own pace as they master content, rather than just based on time. So in today's world, we live in a time-based education system. Districts have pacing guides for their teachers that say on Tuesday, you need to work on decimals, and on Thursday, you need to move on to the next thing. And the reality is on Tuesday, some kids already know decimals. They know how to multiply and divide them, and they're bored. And other kids are lost because they didn't understand the previous topic. And then for a few kids, it's exactly the right topic at the right time. And I think we should transition to no longer have it based on time, but have it based on helping kids learn what they're ready to learn.
So the first thing that comes to mind is if schools were to do this, how do they take, you must get this question all the time, how do they take care of the different paces of the different students in the same classroom?
Well, I think that's one of the things that's so powerful about why we can do it today is that unlike in the past, we have a large and growing array of online and software solutions to enable kids to learn in different ways. And so you can legitimately be in classrooms, and I've been in classrooms with elementary kids and with high school kids, where you may have the teacher working with a small group of them, helping them on a specific topic together. You may have another group where kids are actually working in teams on a project, or they're checking each other's work, collaborating, and then other kids who are working on a software program. And there's Khan Academy and ST Math and many, many more. And because we have internet connectivity so broadly in schools and we have more and more devices, all of these learning modes are possible now. And so a teacher can have a classroom with kids at different levels and can engage with them in the same classroom at the same time, learning different things. And so I think the combination of great teaching and technology is what makes it possible.
So if I'm following you right, it sounds like one thing is even within the classroom, divide the kids up into sections and work with those sections at different levels and different layers of content.
Yeah, and that's certainly one way of doing it. We call that a station rotation model, where there may be different stations, and then over the course of a class period, kids may rotate between them. And so they may get some time with the teacher, sometime in groups, or sometime on devices. But it doesn't always have to be that way. It can be much more individualized, just depending on the teacher and frankly on how many different levels of learning are there in a classroom. Because honestly, it can be all over the map, right? You can really have kids that are very, very far apart, but often you have kids that are in 3 or 4 different places in their learning, and that makes it pretty feasible to do it in groups.
And the second thing that I'm hearing you say is that because of things like Khan Academy and ST Math, kids can also do a lot of what they want to do in order to fit their specific mastery level of learning in doing individual based programs.
Absolutely. I mean, when we think about enabling kids to move forward at their own pace, the other thing that goes with that is personalization of learning. And so since you can learn different things at the same time, you can also learn them in different ways. And as you say, I mean, maybe a different software program might be of more interest or less interest student, or a different topic, right? One student's really interested in sports, one student's really interested in the outdoors. You could have both of them learning how to multiply using a different kind of software program on something they're interested in, and then giving teachers more tools so they can reach students in different ways. So the personalization is a big part of it. And you hear a lot about personalized learning these days. The thing I focus on, though, is that is a path towards enabling mastery learning. So kids really continue to move forward at their own pace.
You're also making it sound really fun. Like if someone is into basketball or cello, if a kid is into that, that you could maybe learn math or science using those as not everything and not for your whole 12 years, but as some sort of base.
Well, I think ultimately when we think about learning, what we find so much is that kids like learning, right? They feel empowered when they learn. I actually got some feedback recently from a college student who was in a mastery learning experience. And at the end of the course, they said, mastery learning reminded me that I love learning and that I'm more than just the sum of a test score, right? That's not who I am as a person. And I think if we have students who are bored, right, because you're teaching them something they already know, or if they're frustrated and lost because they don't have the skills they need to learn it, of course, learning can be a struggle and frustrating. But if you are helping kids engage with content that they're ready for, and then if you find a way to engage them with something they enjoy, you can really make learning fun and engaging. And the more the student wants to learn and is driving the process, the more successful they're going to be.
That actually, as you know, I'm an executive coach, and we feel that way about grown-ups too. The more grown-ups are driving the process, whether it's their career promotion process or any process.
One, I think we talk a lot about empowerment and student engagement and student choice. And it is really interesting. I've had some educators that I work with, like a sixth grade math teacher who, when he first introduced the concept of mastery learning to the kids, they loved it. They were super excited. And then for the next 3 weeks, they were completely lost. Right? They're like, well, how many points is this assignment? Or what's my homework tonight? And so we don't do that anymore. But the other thing he said was he had so many students who were able to master certain learning objectives, and they couldn't actually articulate what the objective was. And so what he basically said is we need to spend more time helping our students know what it is we want them to learn and what success looks like. Because if we give them that information, they can be partners in figuring out how to learn it. But a lot of times we don't spend enough time helping the student understand actually what it is they're learning.
Yeah. For those of us who are with us today, please feel free to type in a question to Scott about mastery learning. Type it in for us. We will put it on the screen. We will ask Scott. And one other request that I make at this point in the show is, what are you starting to take as a takeaway? What's something, it could be a thought you had, it could be something Scott said. What's something that you're starting to take away as a takeaway? Scott, question for you. How did you come to this belief?
Well, so I started doing work in education in about 2007. So I transitioned from HP, where I started my career. And then I had a lot of exposure to educators and just seeing the power, frankly, of great teaching and great teachers. And as time passed, I was looking and saying, great, so how could I make a difference in this space? And so I was looking for something, because I worked in one organization for a few years, and I saw the power of teachers, but also the power of technology, and looking to say, is there some way we could use technology to support education, just like technology has transformed every other sector? And I went to a classroom in East San Jose, and I saw the model that I described, happening. I saw this educator with a group of sixth graders, and she started out and said, look, we all know we all learn at different speeds, and that's fine. So some of you are still working on the problem from last night. I'll work with you guys up at the front of the class. For everybody else, grab your laptops, and then you either work on your Khan Academy or you work on the other homework assignment, etc. They all had a little list that they could look at. And she said, ready, go. And the kids got up. Some of them went up with her in the front. The other kids got their laptops, logged in. And it wasn't all magical, right? There were challenges, like at that time, the battery didn't work on one of them because it wasn't plugged in. And so the guy started chatting with the kid next to him. And so you see some of those things happen in the early days. But what I saw was those students were rocking and rolling, right? They had their little list in front of them. They were learning, and they were doing different things, right? Because they were at different places. But I saw the magic of that. I saw situations where kids were going and helping each other without even being asked by the teacher. She put a structure in place for that. And the teacher was very engaged with a small group of kids, giving them what they needed. And I basically saw this and said, of course we should learn this way. Of course we should help kids learn what they're ready for. And with technology, it's possible at scale. And then a lot of what I thought about was, is there a way that I could use my expertise in technology and scale to help make this happen more broadly?
And what are some of the things you tried? And then we have a question from the audience in a moment.
Well, the first thing I really tried was helping to build the infrastructure to make this possible. When we first started, nobody in the country actually knew how much internet connectivity schools had. Nobody even knew. And so, my first organization funded an organization called Education Superhighway that figured out how much connectivity do schools have, found it was about 30% of them had what they needed. And then we funded them, and they made huge progress to now we're at a point where nearly all schools in the country have enough internet connectivity. So we have to start with the infrastructure. And then the last few years, we've made so much progress that now it's about enabling teachers in the classroom to, with a single mouse click, see where the kids are in their learning and actually get a dashboard so they know what the kids know. Because if you have that information, you can do all the stuff we've been talking about. Then you can use Khan Academy, or you can do a flipped classroom or a station rotation. Teachers know how to do these things more, but you have to have the information. And so my focus most recently has been on building a dashboard so educators can use that information to then personalize learning.
So they literally can look, let's say, even every day and see where they are, where they're in the content.
Correct. And now there's a part of that that's tricky because education, we have standards, and we've got Common Core and things that people have been putting in place to say what should kids learn. I would say that as educators, we've been mushy in our thinking for forever in being clear about what exactly do we want students to know or be able to do when they're done, and what does success look like. And if we're crystal clear about that, then we can actually track this very easily. But a lot of the challenge is that we haven't really been clear on those things. And so helping make that happen. And then the solution, it's an online free software system. And so it's very doable, but there are some challenges in kind of getting there. And that's what I've been working on.
Very, very cool. Here is what somebody asked, somebody who we know asks. Pete Hardigan says, is there data or research yet forming on the topic of mastery learning versus traditional and social, emotional, mental health for learners and for teachers?
So it's interesting. On one hand, mastery learning is not new. Educators were talking about this like in the 1960s, and
really? So actually I never knew that.
There's actually quite a bit of data over the years about mastery learning, personalizing learning. How much of a difference does it make? And so we've seen that kind of data. What I think there's very little data about is some of these models you and I are talking about. If you bring it to life in a classroom today with the combination of software, et cetera, how well does that work? And I think part of the challenge in education is it takes time to get evidence to see whether something changes student learning, because you have to teach for a year, and then you can look and see how the results were, and then you can compare to last year, and things are changing quickly. But I think the bottom line is there's absolutely data about whether this kind of approach works, and we still need more data about some of the specific solutions that we're implementing now to help really catalyze the change.
What's a story that you have of when you have seen a school go from it not working to it working?
Well, there was a kind of an exciting example that I experienced where there's a school in my community that's a Mandarin immersion school, and my kids actually went there in elementary, and then they were gone. But they started implementing mastery learning without my involvement. There's another company that was implementing a Chinese solution in mastery learning. And it was so interesting. For the first time in like 10 years, the principal hosted a parents' night to help explain to the parents what their kids were learning and how it worked. And the principal did a great job because he didn't just stand there and lecture to the parents for 30 minutes. He talked to them for 3 minutes and said, here's what we're doing. It's mastery learning. You guys are going to experience it too. So we're going to break into 3 groups. Parent group number 1 is going to go in that classroom over there. Parent group number 2 is going to go talk to this other teacher, and group number 3 is going to stay here. And so we rotated. We walked into the classroom, and the teacher pulled up Mastery Track on her screen. it was actually kind of funny because she said, there's a rumor that one of our parents or something actually helped make this. And so I kind of said, okay, yeah, it was me. But it was funny because watching the parents see the dashboard, the teacher actually gave them an example of an assessment, and it was in Chinese. So all these other Mandarin immersion parents are arguing with each other about what the right answer was. But watching the teacher walk through it, and for her, it was like, of course, this is what I do. I look at my dashboard, I see where the kids are, I see which ones are more advanced or less, and then I give them targeted resources. I change my lesson plan accordingly. And so watching these teachers, where my kids had gone to school the few years before, that was much more traditional, totally embracing a different way of teaching based on having the data and then enabling kids to move forward at their own pace was really exciting. And then the other piece that was interesting was, as the teachers got information that, you have to assess and see where the kids are. And they've been teaching, so let's say the advanced levels are level A through level N, they've been teaching like level F. And they found there were kids who were like up at level N and they didn't even know. And they were saying, oh my goodness, we've been teaching these kids this basic stuff and they're so much more advanced. And they felt terrible. And then they said, great, how do we help challenge these kids now? Because we know what they know.
That's the thing that you're working on now, which is how to have teachers know what Joe and Mary and everybody in the classroom. That's really cool. I love that you walked in and they said, "We hear one of you is the CEO and founder of Mastery Track. Which one of you is it? We're using it."
It was a very surreal experience, I have to say, very surreal.
Here is a comment and a question. Sabah asks, I love the concept of mastery learning and have known of it for some time without knowing what it was actually called. Thank you, Scott. She says, my question is, to what degree are grades, the traditional and somewhat static way of assessing progress, incongruent with the mastery learning model? And are schools who are adopting mastery learning willing to move away from the numerical grading model to some better way of assessment also?
Yeah, no, this is a key issue. So I would say absolutely it is incongruent with the existing system, right? I mean, the current system, if your child doesn't do very well on their first test at the beginning of the quarter, they spend the entire rest of the quarter figuring out how to raise their grade so that that test that they didn't do well on cripples, and that doesn't make sense in a mastery world, right? In mastery learning, it doesn't matter how quickly you master it. It matters whether you've mastered it, and you can keep trying until you get it. So it is incongruent. A big issue that schools grapple with is how do we do the translation? And I think there are ways of translating because this is a fundamental systemic change, right? On one hand, mastery learning is not that different, right? Teachers are still doing a lot of what they've done before, just in a different way. On the other hand, it shakes the whole establishment to its core, starting with grades. And so a lot of what we see in trying to do this is teachers who will use mastery learning during the course, but knowing they need to translate at the end to give the student some kind of letter grade. And I spend a fair amount of time with teachers saying, let's think about what the rubric is. So for example, I was working with a professor recently and we were agreeing to get a C, a student has to master all of the core content. Now the magic about this is we're clear, they must know all of these things, right? Rather than teaching the whole course and having a bunch of holes along the way and giving them a C because they got about 75%, we say, no, you have to master this subset. And if you don't master it, you don't pass, right? I mean, you must learn it. We're going to guarantee everyone learns it, but they learn the first part, they get a C. Now, if you get further and you get the next more advanced piece, you can get a B. And if you really, finish the last part, maybe with a fancy project or something, you can get an A. And so there is a translation process, but it is all about trying to enable a transformational change in the existing system. And this issue of translating grades is very important. And frankly, no more so than high school transcripts. And we've been working on that issue as well, because that's not the way the world is set up today.
Scott, what if you had your ideal in terms of grades, numeric or letter? What would you recommend for schools to do?
So I do think the key is for us to get clear about what do we want the student to know or be able to do when they're done, right? And our real goal is we're measuring mastery progress. And what we're looking at is, for example, I've got a school implementing Spanish oral language, and we've built a whole structure that shows from beginning novice all the way to, there's an official structure for advanced language proficiency. And the real goal is to say, how far is each student towards getting the full advanced proficiency? So that is what we should be looking at. And then what the school also measures is progress over time, right? Mm-hmm. So we can know, what does a student know today? 3 months from now, we can see what they know tomorrow. We can subtract the two and see how much they've learned. And what we should be measuring is how much learning is happening. I think what we want to do for a student is to say, where are you trying to get, right? How much learning do we want to have happen over this semester, year, whatever we're planning for? And then we're going to track that progress. And then as educators, we should say, how much learning are we hoping to create for our students this year? And that's what we should be tracking. And so when we say, hey, is that school over in your neighborhood a good school? It shouldn't be based on some rating in the newspaper on their test scores. And it shouldn't be based on how white the students are or how rich the students are. No, those things don't matter. It should be based on how much learning is that school enabling for its students. And that's how students should be evaluated, and that's how educators should be evaluated.
So you're actually okay with letter grades, that you don't have a problem with them as long as they measure something different from what they're measuring right now?
Well, I guess the key is when we think, why are we grading? And I think there are reasons where at some point we've got to say, is the learning we want happening for teachers and for students? And how do we make sure that's happening? And I think we can talk about motivation and how do we help make sure that students are putting in the work. But what I've heard from, I talked to a high school student recently who said, you still have to do all the work in mastery learning, right? And if you don't get it, you have to redo it. And what she basically said is, so you want to put in the work because it's annoying to have to redo it, right? You have to keep going until you master it. But what she said is that whole feeling of waking up on Thursday morning when you've got the physics test and being terrified, it's just gone. I just don't have that feeling anymore, right? I still have to do the work, but what a relief, because if I don't succeed, and that'd be a bummer, then I'll go and put in the work and I'll succeed later, as opposed to saying, I got a bad grade and now I'm not going to get into college and now my life is over. She said that feeling is just gone.
That is such a cool story. And I feel that all of us, grown-ups or kids, can relate to that. If you don't have that, I don't even know what's going to be on the test feeling, but this is the content, this is what I've been up to. Okay, I might not, but then I have to repeat, which isn't as fun.
Yeah, well, and you have to put in the work. I think I have a situation where I've got a professor who's been implementing it, and his class is mastery-based. The other classes are not. They're traditional, and so they're kind of punitive. And there's a little bit of an issue, which is some of the students are not spending quite as much time on his course because if there's a midterm coming up in the other class, they're cramming for it because they know if they get a bad grade, they're in deep trouble. Whereas in his course, it's not like that. And he said, if you fall behind in mastery learning and don't put in the work, you are still going to either fail or you're not going to get a good grade, because we're still living in the traditional system, because you have to put in the work and you actually have to learn. And at some point, isn't that really the goal? You have to learn to succeed. That's what we're trying to make happen.
Yeah. Scott, we've got a bunch of questions coming at you. We're going to go about 5 minutes over. Are you okay with that?
Sure.
So here we go. We have someone from Facebook asking, Scott, what is your perspective on this trend of moving away from standardized tests like SAT, ACT as a factor in college admissions?
I do think that it's positive. The challenge I have is that we are stuck in the middle a little bit, right? I am talking about a transformational systemic change. And I do believe we could get to a place where at the state level, they could be tracking student learning progress, mastery based as their process, but we're not there yet. And there is a reality, which is people like saying they don't like standardized tests, and we don't like the state assessments and so forth. And yet someone needs to be accountable to the parents and to other stakeholders and to taxpayers to make sure that children are learning in our education system, right? That system needs to deliver, and we need to be able to track that. So I'm not wild about the SAT for a bunch of reasons, but I also feel like we need to know that students are actually learning and it's happening. And then I think there's also a reality, which is, so how do we think about the colleges on the other end who are receiving now 60% more applicants than they did last year, because now all of a sudden, right, the SAT isn't there. And so anybody can apply, which is great. And there's some admissions officer who has not increased their staff by 60%, who needs to sort through all these things and try and figure out who to admit. And so I think there's a big challenge, which is we don't have enough access to great universities for kids. And the SAT is not perfect, but we don't have the future yet. So I'm supportive, but I'm nervous.
And it sounds like you really can see both points of view. Well,
I think we have to. I mean, and even in mastery learning, one of the challenges that some of these schools have is, but their kids need to have the right kind of transcript to get into the right kind of college, because the college is not yet accepting a mastery transcript. And I totally get that. And I've worked with universities that are trying to do that, but we're trying to engineer this systemic change at the level of the university, the schools, the individual student, the classroom. It's a complex problem, but I think we've got to start.
Next question. Sabah Mirza asks, I know of a few independent schools here locally that have adopted this model. What has been the reception within the public school system?
So I would say, I think there's a very common reaction, which is people who want to do mastery learning want to do mastery learning. And I've got teachers in public schools, private schools, independent schools who are excited about doing it. I think some of the independent and smaller schools have more flexibility in some cases, or more openness or more willingness to try new things. And teachers can do things like get a waiver from their principal to innovate, which can be challenging in public schools. And so I think structural challenges for public schools. And again, I have a lot of sympathy for them too, because if you've got 50,000 kids, and we're talking about changing how grading occurs and how teaching happens, that is not a small thing. And it's hard to adopt something very innovative at the beginning. But I think the educators, I'm finding them in all kinds of schools who are excited about doing this kind of learning.
Scott, how can people reach out to you if they want to connect with you more on mastery learning? I'll share your LinkedIn profile with them, of course, but is there any other way that you prefer?
Sure. You can email scott.ellis@masterytrack.org. Or if you go to the Mastery Track website, which is masterytrack.org, there's a little contact us button in the top right. So send me a link. I get emails there all the time from educators. And it's been interesting how much more sophisticated the questions I'm receiving from educators and non-educators are, because I've been doing this a number of years now. And several years ago, people were saying, how much connectivity do I need and where do I figure that out? And now they're saying, no, I've got my connectivity, I got my devices, my teachers are ready to go. How do I start tracking progress? And so it's exciting to hear that evolution. And so I love to receive those kind of questions.
We're down to our last three questions. Question number 3. If somebody doesn't know anything about mastery learning, what do you believe that they should know? What's one big major concept they should know?
Well, I think that the most important thing is just to understand that the idea is enabling students to move forward at their own pace as they master content rather than based on time. And I think that the key is just say, that's what we're talking about. And then the question is, are they interested in pursuing that? And if so, then they should learn more because people are doing this. But they've just got to understand that's what it is and decide whether they're interested.
A second to last question. For people who have been with us for this program, what is a thought that you would like to leave everybody with?
Ultimately, a lot of what this is about is that we need to stop measuring teaching and we need to start measuring learning. All our lives, we've been in systems where we're measuring, right? It's like, did the teacher make it all the way through the textbook? That should not be the metric. The metric is, did the students learn? So we need to stop measuring teaching and start measuring learning.
Thank you. And our last question. If you could snap your fingers and almost everyone in the world were to take some action, what would you want that to be?
So it's almost the same thing as I said about people who want to know something about this. Step 1 is understand what it is. Step 2 is decide whether you're interested. And then step 3 is to get started. This is a systemic change. The state accountability system doesn't align yet. The colleges aren't necessarily looking for mastery transcripts. We can do this anyway. And I think the key is we can do it in parallel. You can still do grades at the end of the quarter. You can still give the district benchmark assessment. But if you do mastery learning, you'll know before the kids take the test how they're going to do because you know what they know. And so I think we actually can implement this and take steps forward using software and other tools. The key is to understand what it is, decide whether you're interested, and then take the first steps.
Scott, thank you so much. It's been wonderful having you here on the show. Thank you so very much.
Thanks. Well, it was great talking with you. Thanks so much.
Scott Ellis with Mastery Learning.